Hello, my wonderful, beautiful friends, guys. Welcome back to r/MaliciousCompliance, where people on purpose follow orders to spite someone. And in today's episode, we've got nightmare landlords, bossy coworkers, Karen owners, all getting taught lessons they won't forget. So yeah, sit back, relax, and seriously, try not to shake your heads too hard at some of these. Let's dive in. This took place autumn 2019. Shortly after the first frost, our cat brings us a mouse. We take a picture and report to maintenance. They check out the apartment, they see no poop and set a trap. They tell us to let them know if it happens again. A few nights later, we get another mouse, and then the next night, we get 2 more mice. We call maintenance again, and they claim to have found the issue behind the stove. They end up patching it and leave. We of course get another mouse. They claim that there's an issue by our washer dryer, and they patch that. And then there's more mice. At this point, we're requesting a professional exterminator daily, and they refuse. Eventually, maintenance gets sick of our calls. We've never gotten a mouse in the trap, and there's no mouse poop. The only evidence of mice is our pictures of 16 mice with our cats over time. So that's when the maintenance guy comes up with a clever idea. He says, next time we get a mouse, we need to keep it and bring it to the main office. He says they can study it and figure out where it's coming from. Now, my husband and I are both well educated, and we know that's not how mice work. The landlord doesn't want to pay an exterminator, and they don't believe the issue is as bad as it is. With that, it's time for a little malicious compliance. So a night or 2 later, we get a mouse. We manage to catch the thing, and we put it into a garbage can until morning. Unfortunately, the little guy doesn't make it through the night. In the morning, we bag up our friend, and we head to the leasing building. We find the apartment manager there, as well as the landlord, and there's several families waiting to begin a tour of the complex. That's when we explain to our landlord about the now 17 mice, and how we're supposed to personally deliver each mouse to her. She looks at my husband horrified, and then grabs her cell phone, and she heads to a back room. We can hear her screaming at the maintenance guy about his stupid requests. In the meantime, we're explaining to potential tenants the issues we've been facing regarding the mouse problem, and the landlord not wanting to fix the issue. A couple of minutes later, she returns. She tosses the mouse in the garbage, and she says they'll now be paying a professional exterminator to take a look at the building. The exterminator ends up finding hundreds of entry points, which get taken care of. After they patch up all the entry points, that was the last mouse we ever had in that apartment. Yeah, I've dealt with ultra cheap landlords before, guys, and it definitely sucks when they don't think there's any issues with anything and the problem becomes super extreme. I just hope they lost a few potential renters that day, because I can't imagine a lot of people would want to rent a place with a known mouse infestation and the landlord not wanting to do anything about it. That said, props to OP for pulling off this wonderful compliance. And a small part of me does wonder if the maintenance guy was hoping OP would comply so the landlord would take action. Who knows? And this person comments, "You're lucky you got whole mice. We used to get headless little presents dropped on our doormat." I hope you enjoyed this one. This one happened a few years ago in my last apartment. My roommate and I were living in a basement place with upstairs neighbors, and the owner decided to sell. The upstairs neighbors end up buying it, and they became our new landlords. And let me tell you, they were awful at it. I could fill a whole post with the amount of stuff they tried to get away with, but we're here to talk about one particular instance. But suffice to say, they had no idea that landlords had responsibilities. They simply saw us tenants as a source of income, and they suddenly spiked our rent. But there was one time where they maliciously complianced themselves. You see, they had a habit of trying to push stuff on us that was blatantly illegal. Their first contract, for example, said among other things that they had the right to enter the apartment at any time they wanted, and they were allowed to go through our stuff if they wished because we were, quote, living on their property. I pointed out that this was highly illegal, and they grew very upset, saying, "Well, we'll see about that." This clause later suddenly became a real one before we signed. One day, however, our lone fire alarm stopped working. As dutiful tenants, we reach out and we said, "Hey, the fire alarm stopped working." And their response was a surprising, "So what?" That's when we tell them we need to have working fire alarms. It's the landlord's duty to provide working fire alarms. They reply, "No, it's not. You want one, you get it." We tell them the law says otherwise. And here's where they maliciously compliance themselves. Possibly because they were getting tired of being corrected, they got really snooty with this one. We got a very sarcastic response saying, "Oh, it does it? Well, we'll just see what the fire marshal has to say about that." So me and my roommate, upon receiving this message, just burst out laughing. But they were serious. They thought they were gonna contact the fire marshal and he was gonna side with them, and then they could come down on us hard. I don't know what their expressions were when we said, "Okay, well, do that." However, the very next morning, there's a frantic knocking at our door. There's the landlord and his family, and they're looking very concerned. They're holding a bag of brand new fire alarms, one for each room in the place, and he even has 2 spares. The landlord literally begs to be let inside outside of the 24-hour notice, and he says it's an emergency. He has to put up these alarms right now, as they have someone coming to check soon. Trying not to laugh, we let them inside. They then rushed to put one in every single room, apologizing profusely for the delay. They told us, "If you need anything, don't hesitate to ask." Now, I don't know how that meeting with the fire marshal went. We didn't ask when they came to check the alarms, but their attitude painted a pretty clear picture of the ultimate result. They complied maliciously, thinking they'd called our bluff, but what a mistake that was. Yeah, don't you just love it when smug landlords end up regretting their decisions, guys? And be honest, like, who would have held out on letting the landlord inside to install those fire alarms and let them sweat a little? Like, if I were in OP's shoes, it would have been really hard for me to hold back saying, "I'm sorry, you can't enter without 24-hour notice, it's illegal." And this person comments telling us why the landlord was freaking out. They say fines can be upwards of $50,000 or $100,000, depending if it's an individual or corporation, per fine. And this person adds to that, and they say, "And each missing fire alarm is a violation. Window in the bedroom won't open, that's a violation. Escape routes blocked, violation." It adds up real quick. So this is about the time that I got some sweet malicious compliance on my mother, but at the time, I didn't know it fell under this sub. So where I'm from, there's 2 times a year where you can put anything you want to throw out on your front lawn, and it'll be picked up at no cost. And let me tell you, for kids, it's like Christmas, because it's common to go through other people's trash piles and grab anything you like, as one man's trash is another man's treasure. I've gotten dining chairs, roller skates, toys, DVD players, trampolines, etc. It's always fun to see what you can find. Now on to the story and the malicious compliance. So way back when I was 12 years old, my mother sold a lot of our things, TVs and such included, and she put anything we couldn't or didn't want to sell in storage, while she dragged us all over the country for her book tour. We were basically homeless, living on the road and all that. Anyway, when we finally returned to our home state, we moved into a small rental house in a city 4 hours away from where we used to live. And then the unpacking happened. My mother had sold the family TV, and so she stole mine, which I had purposely kept, and she made that the family TV. I was understandably pissed, since it wasn't my fault that she'd sold their TV. So why did I have to give up one of the only items that I'd been allowed to keep? That said, months went by, and then that glorious day came. Me and my siblings were allowed to wander the nearby streets looking for hidden treasures. That year, everyone started moving on from analog TVs to digital ones, so the streets were filled with analog TVs that were being thrown out. Almost every house had one on their lawn. I took my siblings home after some successful treasure hunting, and I begged my mother to help bring one of those TVs home. Now, it would have taken very little effort on her part to get the car and drive it to one of the TVs I had wanted and bring it home. We were both used to some heavy lifting, so between the two of us, it would have been a piece of cake and free. But no, my mom refuses, and she says, if you want a stupid TV so bad, then you have to carry one back to the house by yourself. She said this in a tone that was no way a positive or encouraging one. It was a tone that said, I won't help you, and I know you can't do it alone, so give up. She loved to do this to me, by the way, and I know on this day, she was waiting for me to walk to my room in defeat. But I thought, no way. So I said to my mother, fine, just make sure to hold the door open for me when I come back, so I can bring it inside. I then turned and left, determined to prove her wrong, and she yells, yeah, sure you will. I'll believe it when I see it. So there I was, little 12-year-old me, going from front lawn to front lawn, looking for a good TV that I can manage by myself. There were many that were way too big to carry, and a lot of them didn't have any good way for one singular person to grip them, and they would slip when I tried to pick them up. Eventually though, about 3 blocks from our house, I find a relatively large TV with 2 grip holds that was square enough for me to pick up. And let me tell you, I lugged that thing, arms protesting and back aching the whole way home. It must have taken well over an hour, as I had to set it down every few steps to take a break. But I was determined. Finally, I make it home. Cue the knocking on the door, and me screaming, Mom, come hold the front door open for me. And the look on Mom's face was priceless. She just stood there, dumbfounded, saying, seriously? And that's when I reminded her that I'd only done what she told me to do. I brought that baby inside, and I placed it on my TV stand, where I proceeded to hook up my DVD player, and I gave my mom the biggest grin ever when it turned on. I had that TV for years until eventually I had to put it out on my own front lawn when I got a digital TV of my own. The funny thing about this though is that the TV had to be moved a couple of times while I owned it, moving house and the like. The thing was too heavy, and even with my mom helping, we both struggled to get it out of the house. Yet somehow, on that day, 12-year-old me had managed to lift it all by herself and walked it 3 blocks home. I still look back and laugh at how my stubbornness and spite empowered me like that. Seriously, props to OP, and let me tell you guys, there is literally nothing like the super strength that one gets when they need to be petty towards someone. And if you guys remember analog TVs, you'd know that even the small ones were heavy and bulky as heck. And just picturing OP having to lug one of those heavy TVs the whole way home, again, I think we can all agree, well freaking done, OP. I only wish we could see Mom's face when OP brought that thing home for themselves. Like, the smugness turning into shock must have been priceless. So since the holidays just passed, I'll share a short story with you. A little bit of background. At the time this happened, I worked at a large organization that had a staff of 1,000 to 1,500 people in a travel-related industry. As we all know about the travel industry, certain times are busier than most, and during those times, non-pre-approved vacation days and off days are blacked out. If you call off sick, you need a doctor's note when you return to work. Now, generally, the management doesn't care because it's your sick time that you've earned. But we all have that one guy. This one guy who I'll call By the Book Bob. Now, By the Book Bob got promoted because he was a company man, a yes man, a dude that drank so much Kool-Aid that it oozed from his pores. It was nearing Christmas time, which is the busy holiday travel time, though it's all hands on deck, and several days before and after are blacked out for those vacation days, etc. This blacking out extended to past the new year. So I came into work on Monday, and I went home feeling unwell. Nothing too terrible, just the feeling of being overly tired. Something a day's rest and a good night's sleep should fix. So on Monday night, I call in to let them know that I was gonna take a sick day to rest and recover so I can be at 100% for the impending holiday. I call in, and who answers the phone but by the book Bob? I tell him that I'm gonna take a sick day since I'm not feeling too well. Without skipping a beat, he says, "Remember, the holiday period starts tomorrow. If you call off sick, you need a doctor's note. Don't come to work without one." As I mentally imagine him sitting on the other side of the phone, all excited and happy that he reminded me of the doctor's note instead of wishing me well, I respond, "Okay, cool. So you want a doctor's note when I get back, right? Otherwise, I'll get a write-up." That's when by the book Bob says, "Yup, you're gonna need a doctor's note, and don't you come to work unless you got one." So that said, cue malicious compliance. I say to him, "Sure, no problem." Now what by the book Bob didn't realize is that my personal physician is an old man who gives 0 Fs. The guy took the holidays off. And guess which office was closed until a few days after the new year? Now, am I gonna go to the local non-emergency room on a sick day to camp out for a doctor's note? No. Am I gonna pay out of pocket to go to another doctor to get a note so by the book Bob can be happy? Most definitely no. So my only choice is to hang out at home resting until the new year, and then pop in to get my note, so that's what I do. When I'm finally done with my sick time and I get my doctor's note, it's now nearly 2 weeks later. I head back into work and I drop off my note to buy the book Bob when I get in. I tell him, "Hey Bob, here's that doctor's note you wanted." By the book Bob looks at me and he says, "You were gone for a really long time." To which I respond, "Yeah, you wanted a doctor's note and you told me not to come to work without one. I didn't want to get in trouble since you said it was required. My doctor's office was closed until just yesterday." By the book Bob says, "You couldn't have gotten the note anywhere else?" To which I respond, "Are you gonna pay for my doctor's office visits?" He mumbled no, and I just smiled and walked out. Guys, what a compliance that was. And I'm honestly shocked that by the book Bob didn't spam OP's phone while they were gone for that 2-week period. Especially since it was busy season where they worked. And this person who's a physician shares a short comment and they say, "I'm an emergency physician and I work in the emergency departments in hospitals." Now, especially in the wintertime, hospitals are full of people, with usually long wait times, and we take people in order of severity, not first come, first served. So I'm at work, and I get a new patient. The chart says, "Needs a work note." I go into the cubicle, and I see a patient that's obviously ill. After 40 years of experience, I can size patients up pretty well from across the room. This woman was very ill. Her vitals weren't good, fever of 102 degrees, the works. Talking to her, she tells me that she's got a small cold. I tend to appreciate it when patients tell me the truth. She didn't claim to have pneumonia, anthrax, don't ask, or anything but a cold. Which, being a virus, there is not a hell of a lot I can do for her. So I ask her why she came in. Turns out she's been ill for 2 days. Her fever's actually going down with her taking Tylenol and drinking fluids. But her employer wants a doctor's note in order for her to get more time off. This woman waited in the emergency department waiting room for 5.5 hours to get a note for work. It's not her fault though, it's her employer's. So I ask her, how much time will they give her off? She responds, "There's no limit, I just need a doctor saying I need it." I respond, "Got it." So she went home with a lovely note giving her 2 weeks off with pay, and instructions to return to me for additional time if she needs it to recover. I really hate employers that demand asinine notes like this. Fight the stupidity. So I thought about this one today, and it made me smile, so I thought I'd share. My first job out of high school was a really big deal for me. It was a simple data entry job that I took very seriously. I started moving up very quickly. With so many young entry-level employees, turnaround was high, and I guess sticking around made me stand out. I was soaring in that company, and before I knew it, I was a supervisor over a team. In the department I was in, there was only one other supervisor. We worked really well together, and we agreed on almost everything. In fact, our department was doing so well that our manager was recruited by another department for a much more lucrative role in the company. The new manager was the nicest man alive, but as an outside hire, the guy didn't know anything about how we ran things. At the same time as he was getting acquainted with us, the other supervisor went on maternity leave. I was the only lead in the department left that really knew what they were doing. It sounds rough, but I blossomed under these circumstances. I helped find our new acting supervisor, who I'll call Trevor. I went into all the meetings with my manager to take notes and help him understand what we're discussing. I hired all the new staff members, from talking to the recruiter, conducting interviews, and making the call to offer the position. I was running the show and I loved it. Our new manager was not really grasping things, and he told me he was thinking about leaving. I was of course sad to see him go. He then told me that he thought he would ask them to have me fill his position, and this would have been the opportunity of a lifetime. A week later, my manager told me that he talked to the director, but the position wasn't going to me. It was going to the acting supervisor, Trevor. Apparently, this guy had been schmoozing while I had been working. Trevor had become buddy-buddy with the director by spending all of his time in his office and going drinking with him at the driving range. I was heartbroken. I wasn't aiming for the job until my boss suggested it to me, and I had gotten my hopes up only to be crushed. I kept working though, because what else can I do? I continued overseeing department projects. I had one project that required thousands of entries on this Excel sheet. I assigned our staff to the project and I did my share. At the end of the day, I had gotten the sheets back from everyone directly under me, but no one on Trevor's team had emailed me theirs. So I went to one of their desks and asked about the project. The person I asked shyly told me that Trevor told her not to do it. When I asked her why he would say that, she told me he said to her, "Don't listen to him. He's not your boss." Now I was shocked. This is how we had done every project since we had opened the department. Like, why was he telling people not to do it? Now, I could explain all the small ways that Trevor was constantly trying to undermine me, or the jealous behavior he displayed towards me, but this story's long enough. I'll just say that while shocking, it wasn't out of character for him. I had always been able to keep him from causing damage in the past, and this didn't need to be any different. And that's when I realized what a golden opportunity this was. I decided to maliciously comply. I just nodded and thanked her for her help. The next day, the director calls the manager and supervisors into his office. He asked me why the project wasn't completed the day before. That's when I shrugged and I told him I'd sent it to the team like I always do, and I had even done a chunk of it myself. I then look at Trevor and the look he gave me. The guy was pale and he looked at me as if I was about to sentence him to death. When Trevor eventually tried to explain that he told the staff under him not to do it, the director asked everyone but Trevor to leave. This project had been related to payroll, and Trevor had royally screwed over the payroll staff. Our director was livid. He was in there for over an hour, and I heard the director raise his voice more than once, which was wild. The doors and office walls were glass, so when I passed the office a bit later, I just saw Trevor with his head down while the director was shaking his head and moving his hands in a very animated manner. A week later, the other supervisor returns, and Trevor was demoted to his old position. I was offered the position of manager soon after, which I gladly accepted. Trevor quit not too long after I became manager, as I know he couldn't stand me being the boss. What an ending that was, guys, and seriously, what was Trevor thinking? Like, the guy literally let the power go to his head, and it ruined his career before he was even officially in the position. Like, I'm still trying to wrap my head around how he possibly thought that would end any other way than what it did. When I was in college, I took a class with this gem of a professor. On the first day of class, he asked how many people thought they would get an A in his class. This being a tough engineering school where C was an average, something like 5 students out of a class of 60 raised their hands. He then announced that's how many A's he would give out that semester. That said, all of our tests for that class were multiple choice exams we took online. We were allowed to refer to our notes during the test, and we were allowed to study from old tests as long as we didn't refer to the old tests during the exam, which is fair enough. I studied for the first test, but I didn't have access to any old exams, so I did fine but not great. By the time the second exam rolls around, I made a friend who was in a frat that had multiple copies of old exams from this professor. We and a couple of others took advantage of the rule allowing us to study from old tests. We quickly discovered that on these 50-question tests, this professor had a repertoire of about 75 questions that he pulled from. On the first copy of the test we studied from, we took the time to work through the answers to make sure we understood. By the time we got to the fourth copy, we could answer before we even finished reading the question. Exam time rolls around, and just as the previous years, he pulled from the same pile of questions. I think it took me 12 minutes to answer everything correctly. In hindsight, I probably should have let the clock run a bit. I checked in with the others I studied with the next day, and all of them had gotten 90% plus, which is sweet. We're definitely using that plan for test number 3 and the final. The next day, we all receive an email from the professor letting us know that we're being reported to the dean for an honor code violation. The guy claimed that he had never had anyone make better than an 80 on one of his tests before, so the fact that we all made 90 plus was clear proof we all cheated. This being an engineering school, we were all nerds who were scared about receiving such an email, but we agreed that the best course of action was to talk to the professor before he goes to the dean. So we reach out to him and he agreed to meet us after class. When we meet with him and we laid out our case, he was surprisingly receptive to our explanation. I think in reality, he didn't want to go through with the hassle of reporting us, so we left the meeting feeling pretty good. And we agreed within our study group that we would keep studying from the old tests. Well, about a week before test number 3, this guy announces to the class that because some of us had found the previous test so easy, the next one would have twice as many questions in the same amount of time. Being the cheeky SOB that I am, I asked him as I was leaving what would happen if someone made 100 on this test. His exact response was, "God help you on the final." So we used the same approach in studying for the test, and we found the same pattern of a limited set of questions. Of course, in addition to the extra questions he had promised, all of the questions on this test would be new. So while again, we got to the point that we had the questions and answers memorized, we tried to make sure that we understood the concepts as much as possible to deal with what we expected to be his wrath. The test day comes around, and lo and behold, 87 of the questions are pulled directly from old tests. 10 are from a guest lecture where he basically pulled the question and answer directly from slides. And 3 were filler questions, like 1 + 1 and the Earth revolves around the sun, true or false. I knew that I had everything right. I also knew I didn't want to screw myself and everyone else for the final, so I purposely answered the filler questions incorrectly. So if he looked at the results, he would know what I'd done. I end up getting a 97. I never heard from the professor about the third test, but I do like to think that he was rage scrolling through the results. I don't remember the details about the final, but I do remember the format being the same. My study group also worked together on a group project, which we also made A's on. So if he really only gave out 5 A's that semester, we received them all. And that, my friends, brings us to another end of r/malicious compliance. Guys, I hope you enjoyed today's stories. If you did, hit that thumbs up. And if you're not subscribed, consider subscribing so you don't miss these crazy stories. And if you missed the last episode on the channel, it's an r/entitled people episode, where psycho HOA Karens are getting put in their place. It's such a wild episode, so go check it out if you haven't, and myself and Stevie Boy will see you guys in the next one. We love you.